So today's deep dive, we're going to get into all the ways our brains construct this sense of self and the world around us,
Yeah.
even when it encounters some pretty weird stuff. We're talking neurological quirks, hiccups, the whole shebang. One of the things that totally blew my mind was this idea of body image.
Okay.
And I don't mean, how we feel about our reflection in the mirror.
Right.
This is literally about our brain's internal map of where our body is in space, like moment to moment.
Yeah. It's pretty fundamental.
It's fundamental.
It's how we navigate the world.
Yeah.
It's essential for even the simplest action. Imagine trying to grab your coffee cup if your brain didn't have a clear sense of where your arm was in relation to the cup.
So how does the brain even begin to build this internal body map?
A lot of it comes down to a region tucked away in the parietal lobe. It's called the superior parietal lobule.
Catchy name.
Or SPL for short. So the SPL, it's constantly taking in all this sensory information from your muscles, your joints. It's like an air traffic controller for your body. It uses all of this information to create this dynamic real-time map of where everything is and how it's moving.
So it's always updating?
Oh yeah, it's a live feed. But here's where it gets really wild. Researchers studying stroke patients, they found something completely unexpected. All right, so picture this. You've had a stroke that's affected your left arm, and it's left it paralyzed. Now, intellectually, you know it's your arm, but it doesn't feel like it. And in some cases, patients with damage to the SPL, they'll actually reject their paralyzed limbs.
Wait, what?
Claiming they don't belong to them at all.
Whoa, seriously? They're like, get this thing away from me.
Exactly.
That's wild.
It might belong to the doctor, a family member, even the furniture.
Oh my gosh.
It seems illogical, but it really highlights how important that sense of congruence is between the brain's internal map and the actual sensory feedback it's getting.
Right.
When those two things don't match up, the brain scrambles to create a story that makes sense.
It's I got to fill in the blanks here.
Exactly, even if it means inventing a story about a misplaced limb.
That's not my arm, that's the couch's arm.
There you go.
So our brains are like master storytellers, even if the plot gets a little wacky sometimes.
They're trying to make sense of the world.
But what about the flip side? What happens when someone wants to remove a perfectly healthy limb?
Now that takes us into some fascinating territory. Territory of apotemnophilia, also known as body integrity, identity disorder.
All right. I have to admit, even the name sounds like a sci-fi thriller. Okay, so we're talking about people who actually experience this desire to amputate a healthy limb.
Yeah, it's definitely a challenging concept.
It really is. It seems to go against every instinct we have.
It challenges our understanding of what it means to have a body, to identify with that body.
Yeah, and I imagine early on the medical community was pretty quick to label it as purely psychological.
Oh, absolutely.
Some kind of delusion.
Yeah, like a strange desire.
But as research progressed, thankfully, scientists decided to look a little deeper into the brain itself. And I'm guessing they found something interesting there. I feel like all roads lead back to the brain in these cases.
You're right about that.
So spill the beans.
All right, so remember the SPL?
Oh, yeah.
That region we talked about?
The one that creates our internal body map?
Brain scans of people with apotemnophilia showed something really striking.
Hit me.
In many cases, the representation of the unwanted limb was simply missing. But here's the fascinating part. It wasn't missing in the somatosensory cortex.
Okay, and just remind me, what's that again?
So that's the part of the brain that receives the physical sensations from the limb.
So the brain is still getting signals that the limb is there?
The missing piece was specifically in the SPL, the area that's responsible for constructing that more abstract sense of me and my body.
So it's like their brains are saying, yeah, I'm getting signals from that arm, but it just doesn't feel like it's actually a part of me. It really flips the script on those early assumptions that this was purely psychological, don't you think?
It really does. It suggests something much more complex is going on.
And it makes you wonder, about all the other subtle ways our brains might be shaping our sense of self without us even realizing it. So is there anything else fascinating about apotemnophilia?
There's another layer to this that I think you'll find interesting. Some individuals with apotemnophilia report feeling a sexual attraction specifically towards amputees. It's a controversial finding for sure, but it does seem to suggest a link between body image attraction and desire. If we think back to that idea of the brain striving for congruence.
Between its internal maps and the outside world.
Yeah, could this mean that for some with apotemnophilia being with an amputee, it lessens that sense of incongruence they feel?
Wow, so it's not just about a physical difference, but maybe a deeper desire to align their internal sense of self with their actual experience of the world. So we've seen how the brain can reject parts of the self in a way.
Right.
But what about when it distorts our perception of the outside world? Like those contamination fears where you feel that almost visceral sense of being dirty, even when you know logically you haven't touched anything remotely unclean?
Oh, yeah, those contamination fears are classic.
The hallmark of OCD.
Exactly. It goes way beyond just being a little squeamish.
It's true. For those with the OCD, they know it's not rational, but they can't just turn it off.
It's not just a thought. It's a full-blown bodily sensation. There was this fascinating study where researchers showed people with OCD a video.
Okay.
And in this video, someone was touching, let's just say it was meant to evoke a very strong disgust response.
I'm feeling a little squeamish just hearing about it.
So they're watching this video, and the participants, they're fully aware that it's someone else touching this contaminated object.
Okay.
But here's the thing. They actually experience that feeling of disgust, like physically in their own bodies. And the feeling only subsided when the experimenter washed their own hands.
Wait, so not even when the person in the video washed their hands?
No.
It had to be the experimenter washing their own hands.
Exactly.
Hold on a second. So you're telling me these people are watching someone else touch something disgusting?
Yeah.
And their brain is basically going, nope, that's my hand that feels contaminated.
That's a great way to put it. It really highlights how powerful our brains are. They create these visceral experiences even when they're rooted in something happening outside of our own physical bodies.
That is so bizarre.
It really is.
So what part of the brain is like running the show in these situations?
A key player in all of this is a brain region called the insula.
What's the deal with this part of the brain?
So think of the insula as the headquarters for disgust, along with other strong internal sensations like pain, hunger, and even certain emotions.
Wow, so it's a busy place.
Disgust, it has deep evolutionary roots. It's there to protect us.
If you see someone eat something and they get sick, you don't want to eat that thing either.
Exactly.
Even if you didn't even take a bite.
Your brain is like, nope, not doing it.
Our brains are amazing. They're so good at picking up on those cues.
It's all about survival.
So we've got the SPL up there managing our internal body map. We've got the insula sounding the alarm bells for disgust. It's like our brains are juggling all these different roles to create this one cohesive sense of self.
They're a complex system, for sure.
But what happens when those systems get totally out of whack?
All right, let's talk about sleep paralysis.
Sleep paralysis. Okay. I have definitely heard some creepy stories about that one. Isn't that where you wake up but you can't move?
That's the one.
Okay. And people have hallucinations and stuff?
Damn, it's a wild ride.
That sounds terrifying.
It is. It's a very unsettling experience.
So what's going on in the brain during sleep paralysis that causes this perfect storm of weirdness?
During sleep, especially REM sleep, when we dream, our brains essentially hit the paralyze button on our bodies.
So we don't act out our dreams.
Exactly. It's
Yeah.
a safety mechanism. But sometimes there's a glitch in the system. We regain consciousness before that paralysis has fully worn off.
Oh boy. So our mind is awake, but our body's still in sleep mode.
You got it.
That sounds like a recipe for disaster.
And it can be, because remember, the brain hates incongruence.
It wants everything to make sense.
Exactly.
So what happens?
In this case, the motor cortex, the part of the brain that controls movement, it's sending out signals.
Move your arm.
But the body's still in paralyzed mode, so there's no feedback coming back.
So the brain's, hello, is anyone home?
Pretty much. The brain, being the creative problem solver that it is, tries to fill in the blanks.
It's coming up with explanations.
Those feelings of pressure, the sense that someone's in the room, the hallucination, those are all the brain's way of explaining away those weird sensations.
So it's like our brain is writing a horror movie to explain why we can't move.
And it's a very convincing horror movie.
So all these things we've talked about, phantom limbs, contamination fears, sleep paralysis, it seems like our brains are capable of creating some really strange experiences.
Our brains are full of surprises.
They really are, and it makes you wonder how much of what we experience as reality is actually just our brain's best interpretation of what's going on.
How much of it is perception and how much is actually out there?
Exactly. I think it's safe to say our brains are a lot more powerful and a lot more mysterious than we often give them credit for.
Absolutely. And we're only just scratching the surface of understanding how they work.
This has been an incredible deep dive.
It really has.
We've gone from phantom limbs to contamination fears to sleep paralysis demons. It's been a wild ride.
Our brains are full of surprises.
That's for sure.
Yeah.
So next time you bump your elbow and feel that weird tingling, just remember,
What's that?
your brain might just be trying to tell you a story.
Our brains are master storytellers.